Hi, Chuck at Kodabow Crossbows. We're going to talk about crossbows and arrows and broadheads today. So without further delay, let's get busy. There's three basic types of broadheads, and we're going to talk about each of them. Fixed blade, replaceable blade, fixed, and mechanical. Let's zoom in and take a look at the fixed blade and talk about the construction of this broadhead. First off, this one is all one piece. You can see that it begins cutting right at the very tip, and it's really a knife edge all the way to the tip. We like this type of broadhead because of its strength. It's all one piece, there's nothing to come off of it, and it's steel. So many folks will think that this type of cutting profile will give you the best penetration. Hard to beat a fixed blade broadhead. Simple. This one has vents, so there's minimal surface area on the broadhead when it flies. We'll drop down now and look at the replaceable blade. Similar design. It's a fixed blade, and the blades can be removed. So after you would shoot the broadhead, this aluminum body and steel cutting surfaces, the steel blades can be replaced. And to do that, there's normally a front area that on this particular brand it unscrews, and then the blades could be removed and reassembled. Always pays to be careful when you're working with broadheads so you don't cut yourself. So here's an example of a replaceable blade fixed. Now some folks are going to say, well, the aluminum isn't as strong. We'll talk about that a little bit. And some will say, hey, well, we don't begin cutting, though the manufacturers have certainly improved the front end of these types of styles. The last one is a mechanical broadhead. And the advantages of this principally is it'll fly most like a field point. In this case, it's a front opening, so as the broadhead impacts the target, the blades open up. Now this particular broadhead is made for turkey hunting, so they've actually dulled the front end of this to minimize penetration. So the examples of the broadheads you can see, pretty big cutting area, but they always depend on two things happening. First, that the broadhead does not open on the way to the target animal, and the second is that when it gets to the target animal, it does open. So some folks, you'll find loyalists for this style. This is an NAP Spitfire. Other types are like Rage. This is a Muzzy. And other types in this category would be like Slick Trick. This is an NAP Hellraiser, and other types would be like, for an example, a G5 Montec. Each have their advantages. Broadheads become a little bit of a personal choice, and really what you've had success with. Now I'm going to take this arrow, and one of the things that we like to do, and this is a hunting discussion, not necessarily a target discussion, is we like to take the arrow, and once we attach the broadhead, we'll spin it and ensure that there's no wobble and everything looks pretty good. And sometimes if there's something wrong with the alignment and everything, you can see it by just doing a spin on the table. So that's a quick discussion of the different broadhead types. Let's take a look at what happens when an arrow hits the target and what can happen when a bad shot is made. This is a little bit of a curiosity. Normally when we shoot, we're going to shoot for the vital area, and typically in archery you want a pass-through shot through the heart-lung area. I shot this deer a few years ago, and when the taxidermist got it, he called me up and said, hey, I got to show you something. And sure enough, in this whitetail, there was an arrow embedded from a previous hunter who obviously made a very poor shot, or an unethical shot. I'm not sure which. Probably both are the same. And there's about 4.5 inches of arrow embedded in the skull of this animal. I didn't know it at the time. It was only when the taxidermist pointed it out to me. But here's what happened. And we can talk about broadheads. The shot went in here, and you can see it was an aluminum arrow, and the arrow broke off, went into bone. So again, from a hunting perspective, not good to hit hard bone. Certainly this is a very poor shot. But when we turn it around and we see what happened on the other side, it was pretty much across the skull penetration. You can see the broadhead was sheared off. All the blades are gone. And this was a replaceable blade style. So the front of the broadheads here, it was an aluminum body that remains intact, but the blades basically sheared off when they hit bone. So at the time I shot the deer was fine feeding with another doe, but had been living with this situation for some time, and you can see that the bone had begun to grow over. So pretty durable animal for sure. It profiles what can happen, with a bad shot, but and also how a broadhead performed in heavy bone. So more of a curiosity item, but certainly interesting to me. Crossbow arrows are 20 inches long, 22/64 in diameter, roughly about 0.343 of an inch. There's two basic rear nock styles. At Kodabow, we use a flat nock, completely flat. We do that because our claws fly up. As the string is coming off the claws, the string is coming down to the rail and can get squarely behind this arrow, push it down the rail very effectively. So this is our style. Another type you'll see out there is called a half moon nock, which is this. And take a look at this very closely. You can see that it is not flat, but kind of a V shape, like a normal arrow nock. So when we put this in the arrow, we have to align this so that the V part catches the bowstring and it's perpendicular to the index vein. So the concept here is the string may be, when it's released, flying away from the rail, and it's got to get caught in this little V and then be pushed down the rail. So we don't like, generally a couple rules we apply, we don't like plastic rear nocks, and we are not a fan of the half moon because I have to orient the arrow perfectly in this position all the time, whereas with a flat nock I could put it any which way on the rail, and certainly if this turns, this little V area becomes actually a ramp for the string to go over. So it's opinion, we just think flat nocks are a lot better. At the front of the arrow, you're going to put an insert. We use 110 grains of brass, and so we end up with a lot of weight forward, which is a very good thing, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. But again, this could either be aluminum and brass, and now let's take a look at a couple arrows and what the implications of them are. Here's a hunting arrow set up. So I've got two arrows actually made a little differently, but let's take a look. First, I've marked the arrow about 10 inches down with this white tape on each arrow. So it's the midpoint of the arrow right there. And what I'm going to do is they both have 100 grain tips on them. So theoretically they're shooting 100 grain broadheads. I'm going to take a piece of blue tape and I'm going to find the balance point of this arrow of where the arrow balances. So, and I'm going to mark that spot. So I've got the tape, it's balancing right about there, and I put the blue tape, bingo, and we're good. I'm going to do it with a second arrow. I'll take my blue tape, I'll find the balance point of the arrow, and we'll go. So now I've got two balance points marked. Let me put the arrows, index them again, and what do we see? We see that this arrow has balances much forward, so of the other arrow. Really, it's pretty significant. And to cut to the chase, this arrow has about an 18% of its weight forward of the center point. So here was the center point of the arrow, here's where the balance point is. This one is much shorter. Now when we step back from these arrows, how do they fly and what are the implications? Well, what I want to do when I shoot a broadhead especially, I want to give these vanes at the rear as long of a lever as I can to steer that broadhead. So we, through observation and fairly well known among archers that shoot crossbows extensively, FOC is very important, and I want to give the broadhead the shorter lever, okay, so it doesn't steer my arrow as well as my vanes do. So fundamentally, these arrows, actually this arrow weighs a little bit more than this one, but has an aluminum insert here. So with that aluminum insert weighing 30 grains and a 100 grain broadhead, I have 100 plus 30 or 130 grains of weight at the front of this arrow. Alternatively, in this case, which is the arrow we like, we have 110 grains of brass and 100 grains of a field point. So really 100 plus 110 is 210. So 210 grains versus really 130 grains. So before we get to the discussion of, well, how much should my broadhead weigh, a lot of it depends on how your arrow can be constructed. And we basically have, through shooting a lot, like the high forward of center and a balance point well forward so that these vanes have a good steering mechanism and can control that broadhead in flight. When the broadhead is on an arrow, it's kind of wanting to go its own way sometimes, and it's in opposition to the vanes at the other end of the arrow. So that's a little bit how that works. Again, when I look at this other arrow, which I prefer possibly a little less for sure, it's got the lighter, the FOC isn't as high as we like it, and it's got a plastic rear nock. Again, we would prefer the metal. So that's a quick overview of arrows. Let's look at, again, we looked at some components. For hunting purposes, you know, we like to just shoot the arrows and not get too deep early in the game of weighing different components. We know components are going to weigh differently. Here's a 125 grain field point. It weighs 125.0, perfect. Here's a 100 grain field point. It weighs 98.8, so it's a little under. Now, some folks are going to try to get everything and optimize it. It certainly doesn't hurt at all to do that. But what we find most productive is actually to go out and shoot the arrows and see where they go. And certainly when we're shooting a broadhead, we're going to shoot this into a foam target and actually see where our broadheads fly. When we shoot our field points like this, we tend to use bag targets. It's for easier extraction. And what we want to always understand is, does our field point and impact when we put a different broadhead style on affect that? And as we mentioned earlier, the low profile of a mechanical, which is has no wing surfaces out here until it opens up at the target, will fly. The mechanicals tend to fly much more like a field point. So that's a quick discussion on some components, and you can weigh different things. You know, a vane might weigh seven grains. We tend to like big vanes. Again, the advantage is I want a lot of control surface. The drag is not significant, so I want as much control surface to steer that arrow going down range. At Kodabow, we mark our arrows, so we try to determine the variance arrow to arrow and where they shoot. We just use a little felt pen to kind of tell one arrow from the other, because sometimes our bows, there's very little variance in our bows. A good shooter has very little variance. Sometimes the arrows create the variance, so we want to understand how each arrow shoots. So in summary, hey, thanks for coming by Kodabow. Hopefully you've picked up a few of the basics on the different broadhead styles and some of the implications of arrow flight. Again, this is a hunting discussion, not necessarily a target discussion, but I think these concepts will serve you well, and if you follow them in the field, I think you'll be successful. Thank you very much.